The county offered the same 104 acres 3 times. 3 times the courthouse steps went quiet when the auctioneer asked for an opening bid. At the fourth sale, in March, a 38-year-old widow named Corinne Ashbury raised her card and said $91,400. It was very close to every cent her husband's life insurance had ever paid her. For 22 years, the kudzu had been taking that place the way still water takes a low field. First the fence line, then the hay barn, then the shape of the hills, until the whole property read from the highway as one long green wave that changed color with the season and never changed shape. Somebody near the back laughed, and then 2 more. Every man on those steps had fought the vines on his own ground and knew how that story ended. What was out there had stopped being a weed problem a long time ago. It had become a landscape. Not one person in that room knew that under the vines 9 trees were still alive. Neither did the woman who had just paid for them. 3 weeks later, she walked 83 goats down the slope. In Luke chapter 13, the Lord himself told about a tree that had borne nothing for 3 years, and about the man who asked for one more season before it came down. Let it alone this year also, till I shall dig about it and dung it. Corinne Ashbury had 3 growing seasons. Would that be enough? Georgia tax sales happen on the first Tuesday of the month on the courthouse steps. That Tuesday in March, the wind came down the street in front of the Gilmer County Courthouse cold enough that the auctioneer read the parcel description with his collar up, and the men standing there kept their hands in their pockets, which is its own kind of bidding. They all knew it. They called it the kudzu place. Corinne Ashbury had spent 12 years as a claims adjuster in Atlanta. Her job was to stand in other people's driveways after the worst week of their lives and write down a number for what they had lost. 3 years a widow. She wrote everything down and did not talk much, and people often mistook the second thing for the first. Nolan Ashbury had been her husband for 11 years. He died on a January morning, his heart, before the ambulance got up their street. And that is the whole of it, because she never told it longer than that to anybody. What he left behind was a boy and a check. The boy was Otis, 8 years old, waiting out of the wind in the courthouse hallway with a pencil box flat on his knees, counting ceiling tiles. He counted things the way other children hummed. The parcel was 104 acres east of the county line, with no productive use in the record. Somebody, a generation ago, had planted kudzu on the road bank to hold the soil, which is what people were told to do once. And the vines did exactly what they were asked and then kept going. 22 years. When the auctioneer asked for an opening bid the 4th time, she said the number without raising her voice, and the gavel came down on $91,400. She did not buy it to farm it. She had driven past that wall of vines every month for 2 years on her way to a claims office in Ellijay, and a thing valued at nothing had begun to look like a thing nobody had looked at. That is not agriculture. That is a woman who priced losses for a living, buying the largest one in the county. What she had, besides the deed, was a legal pad out of the claims office with a column of figures down one side and the word goats written across the top and underlined twice. Goats eat kudzu. Goats prefer it. There was a condition, and she understood it before signing. The land came in under a conservation use covenant, which lets working ground be taxed as working ground. To keep it, she had to show real agricultural use, and a county appraiser would walk the kudzu himself in the spring of the 4th year. 3 growing seasons. If the covenant broke, the back taxes and the penalty came due at once, and no version of her arithmetic survived that. After the $91,400, after the fees and the transfer, what was left would buy a used stock trailer
a pair of school shoes in September, and something under half the goats on the legal pad. She signed her name, took the key to a gate nobody had opened in 22 years, and drove out toward the only thing the highway would show her, which was a single color. If you have ever been told that the thing you wanted to save was not worth saving, then you already know exactly how she felt sitting in that truck with the engine off. The first walk-in got her 400 yards in an afternoon. The vines had gone over the fence and made a wall of it, so she went in where a deer went in, on her hands and knees, Otis behind her. Under the leaves it was cool and dim, a green ceiling 20 feet up in places, holding the light out. The air smelled of wet leaf and rot, and once of something dry and sweet, the way a pecan husk smells after rain. She found the hay barn by walking into it. Otis found 11 fence posts and reported the number. From the crown of the slope, the whole of it showed at once, and that was the problem. 104 acres of kudzu reads as a single object, and there is nowhere on a single object to start. Burl Tannehill was 71, had run goats on that ridge since his grandfather ran them, and was the only man in the county who did not laugh. He told her what goats do, which is browse, up and out, leaf and vine and bark, and what goats do not do, which is anything a person counts on. He sold her 83 head at a price fair to both and generous to neither. He also handed her a brass bell on a worn strap and said to hang it on the lead doe. The doe was Pepper, gray-muzzled, who came off his trailer like she owned it, and the herd followed. In fog, Burl said, the eyes are no good to anybody. The ears still work. They set electric netting and split the near slope into paddocks of 4 acres. 8 to 10 goats to the acre, he said, and move them before they get bored. The last week of March, she opened the gate, and 83 goats went down into the vines. The sound was not what she expected. Steady, dry, enormous, hundreds of leaves at once, and somewhere inside it, moving, the bell. Merle Yates farmed the 200 acres along her west line, 56, loud, not a cruel man. He believed what he had seen, and what he had seen was kudzu outlast a bush hog, a dozer, and 2 chemical companies. He stopped his truck at her gate and watched the goats a while. "Which one runs out first?" he asked. "That kudzu or your money?" In mid-April, she walked a paddock the herd had stripped bare 11 days before. The ground had been open. She had seen the dirt. Coming up through it now, in even rows down the face of the hill, were new shoots, ankle high. The kudzu had not been killed. It had been mowed. Under every stem, the root crown sat in the ground like a closed fist. 22 years of stored sugar. And the herd had taken only the top. 2 seasons, Burl said on the phone. Maybe 3. Graze it, let it come. Graze it again, until the root spends what it saved. The other thing happened the same week. There was an old, hand-dug well below the barn, on No Plat, and the vines had grown a lid across its mouth that looked exactly like ground. One of the yearlings went through. They worked past dark with rope and a light, and Burl came, and it was not enough, and near midnight he put his hand flat on the winch and said her name once, quietly. They filled the well the next morning with rock and clay. That night she sat at the kitchen table with the ledger from her old work, the one built for writing down what a loss was worth. And this time she did not know what to put in the right-hand column. By the last week of October, the east slope had been eaten down to the shape of the land under it. The goats had worked that hillside in rotation since August, 4 paddocks, moved every 9 days, and what they left behind looked less like pasture than like a room stripped of its wallpaper. Corinne walked it on a Tuesday morning, with frost still holding in the low spots. Dead vines hung off the fence wire in dry gray ropes. And standing up out of the chewed ground, straight, pale, wider around than she could reach, were trunks. She had walked past them all summer. Under the green ceiling, they had been shapes in a wall of leaves. No different from the old cattle chute. No different from the well the vines had covered until a goat found it. She counted them twice, the second time with her hand on each one. 9. Burl came up the slope that afternoon, put his palm flat on the bark, and said the word before she could ask for it. Pecan. Not young ones either. He stepped off the distance between the first two, 40 feet, then the next two, 40 feet again, and the grid ran on into the vines where the clearing stopped. Somebody had planted an orchard on this hill and walked away from it, and the trees had gone on standing in the dark for 22 years the way a pecan will, because a pecan can live past 100 years and has no interest in the plans of whoever put it there. The wind came up the slope smelling of husks, that sharp green shell smell. The goats had left the split pecan hulls where they lay. Then Burl crouched down. Around the base of the nearest tree, at about the height of a goat's shoulder, the bark was gone. Not scraped, taken, in a clean band all the way around, down to pale wet wood. A tree feeds itself through a thin, living layer just under its bark. Cut that band the whole way around, and nothing travels between the leaves and the roots anymore. The tree stands through the winter looking like a tree. It will even leaf out one more spring on what it has stored, and then it dies with its branches full. 3 of the 9 were ringed most of the way around. 1 was ringed all the way. They can't tell, Burl said. A goat don't know the difference between what you turned her out here to eat and what you'd give anything to keep. It's all bark to her. Fixing it cost her twice. Welded wire cylinders around all 9 trunks, staked deep, tall enough that a doe up on her hind legs could not reach over the top. And that was money already promised to winter hay. The exclusion fence around the grove pulled 4 acres out of the rotation, and they were the 4 acres the herd had been clearing fastest. Every day the goats spent somewhere else was a day the kudzu on that slope got back on its feet. She built it anyway, through November, mostly in the rain, with Otis handing up the staples, one at a time. He named the biggest one Big Tuesday, because Tuesday was the day they found it. He was 9 years old that fall, and that was reason enough. Those 9 trees had not given her a single nut. What they had given her was a reason not to sell the place that winter. Ground like that, written off, grown over, offered 3 times to nobody, sits in nearly every county in this country, and whatever is standing under it has been standing there a while. Tell us where you are watching from. Put your town in the comments. Dr. Nadine Croft drove out the second Thursday in January with a soil probe rattling in the bed of her truck. She was the county extension agent in her 40s, raised on a dairy farm 1 county east, and her work was telling farmers the truth about their dirt, whether they wanted it or not. Corinne had called in October and again in November and gotten nowhere, until she stopped asking for an opinion and asked for a test she would pay for. Letterhead was the only language the courthouse had ever spoken. They pulled cores all morning, 15 from the paddocks the goats had grazed twice, 15 from a strip along the north fence still shut in under the green ceiling. The soil report came the first week of February. Organic matter in the grazed paddock ran 3.1%. In the untouched strip, 2.4. Nitrate nitrogen came back at 26 parts per million against 18. 82 goats crossing a hillside all summer had put more back into that soil than she could have hauled in on a truck. That part she had hoped for. Nadine turned the page over, set her finger on the control column, and said that was the number worth looking at. For soil that had seen no plow, no cattle, and no fertilizer since before Corinne was married, the nitrogen had no business being that high. Kudzu is a legume. Same family as beans and field peas. Down on its roots, it carries nodules of bacteria that pull nitrogen out of the air and fix it into the ground. And the kudzu had been doing that across 104 acres, every season, without stopping. 22 years. The thing that had made the land worthless had been feeding it the whole time. Corinne started a proper ledger that winter. Dates, paddock numbers, days grazed, what the goats would not eat. 12 years of pricing other people's losses had left her good at exactly one thing, and now the thing being measured was hers. The money went out, and none came in. $600 of hay in December. A vet call at 2 in the morning for a doe with pneumonia. Mineral, diesel, wire, a fence charger after lightning found the old one. Otis had learned to count to 82 and then backward from it, and did it out loud at the gate every evening. He had learned that number the week they filled the well, and he never once counted to the other one. In the shed one afternoon, looking for fence pliers, she moved a tarp and found Nolan's toolbox. Green, dented, his handwriting on a strip of tape across the lid. The sockets still lay in the order he had left them. She shut the lid, set it back on the shelf, and finished the fence with the pliers she had. Burl came by at the end of the month with a sack of mineral he said he had bought by mistake. Under his arm was a Bible, black, the cover gone soft as cloth. It had been his wife's. He put it on the kitchen table, opened it to a page she had marked in pencil years before, and left it lying open while he talked about the price of hay. I will restore to you the years that the locust hath eaten. He took the empty feed sack with him when he went. The county would come walk this ground in the spring after next and write it down as a working farm or as nothing. 2 growing seasons. That was all she had bought. By February, the only thing on the place that had not run out was the vines. And the thing running out faster than her money was the seasons. The sound came up the ridge before the light did. In the last week of June, in the second summer, Corinne stood at the top of the east cut and listened to the herd eat. A whole herd working a hillside of kudzu made something closer to rain on a roof 2 fields over. Where the leaf lay thick, the tearing ran together. Where the slope was opening, it came apart. That summer was the 3rd pass over the east cut and the 4th over the barn slope. The first grazing takes the leaf. The second takes what the plant shoves up to replace it. The 3rd and 4th take what it cannot spare, because every new canopy is paid out of sugar stored underground, and that pocket is only so deep. By August, the kudzu came back late, thin, and low, and on the barn slope, it never closed over the fence line. Burl set his boot on red dirt that had not been in daylight for 22 years. He called it the retreat and told her not to call it anything stronger. The electric cooperative had 11 acres of right-of-way gone to kudzu and briar, too steep for a bush hog and too close to live wire for a spray crew. $600 an acre, the goats hauled and watered at her expense. $6,600, and the animals ate the invoice. In September, a burial association south of Ellijay paid $750 an acre for 4 acres of headstones. In October, the school board paid $2,200 for the bank behind the elementary ball field and let the 3rd grade out to watch the goats work. Merle Yates had driven past that fence for 2 seasons without stopping. That September, he pulled onto the shoulder and got out. I laughed at you, he said. Every man at the feed store laughed, and I was the loudest. And it wasn't meanness. I watched 2 men take that ground. One bush hogged it a summer and quit. One borrowed against his home place, sprayed 2 seasons, and watched it come back thicker the 3rd spring. A man who's seen 2 people go under doesn't clap for the 3rd one wading in. Then he asked what she charged by the acre for the goats, and wrote it on the back of a feed receipt. The fog came the 2nd week of September. She went up at dawn to move the netting and found the paddock empty, the gate shouldered open, white in every direction. She called, and the fog handed her voice back flat. So she quit calling and stood still. Below her and off to the left, farther down than she would have guessed, the bell. She walked toward the bell the way a person walks toward a porch light, and found Pepper in a stand of sumac with the goats bedded around her. Driving home from the school job, Otis, 10 that fall, asked what she was putting on the bill. "Brush removal," she said. He thought about it for most of a mile. "That's not right," he said. "We're not taking anything off it. We're just giving it back." That night, she opened the ledger from the old job, the one she had filled for 12 years with other people's losses. For the first time since the auction, the number in the right-hand column had no minus in front of it. Most of what gets sold as progress is somebody in a hurry. That hill came down because a woman refused to hurry, 1 pass at a time, while a county waited for her to quit. There is a kind of person who hears "go faster" and slows down on purpose. This channel is built for them. Subscribe and stay with this one. By April of the 3rd year, the east cut was open enough to plant, and she planted 1 strip, 40 feet wide and a 1/4 mile long, what she could water and pay for. 38 young pecan trees went in by hand, Otis dropping a flag at every stake. She did not buy an orchard. She bought a strip, set it against the fence of the 9 old trees, and told herself the next slope would come next spring if the herd earned it. Nadine Croft had shown her the whip craft on a bench in the barn until her hands quit shaking. In March, before the buds moved, she took scion wood off the 9 and kept it damp and cold until May, when the bark slipped. Every tree she set out that spring carried wood from one of those 9. 22 years the old trees had stood covered with nothing to show for it. Now they had children on the hill below them. None of it would feed anybody soon. A grafted pecan needs 6 to 10 years before it makes a crop worth hauling to a buying station. The orchard on the east cut belonged to Otis at 20, not Otis at 10. The last week of May went dry and stayed dry. 31 days without rain, and the ridge end of the strip sat on the thinnest dirt on the place. She hauled water in a 200-gallon tank 2 trips a day, then 3. By July 11, of the 38 had gone brown to the graft, and there is no arguing with a dead pecan tree. She replanted in November and said very little about it. In October, a white county sedan came slow along the road above the gate, slowed further, and did not stop. Dean Whitcomb was 44, the appraiser for Gilmer County. The man whose signature decided whether 104 acres were a farm or only dirt, and whether Corinne kept the agricultural rate she had signed for, or owed the county the difference. He wrote on a clipboard against the wheel, and drove on without putting the window down. The goats worked the north slope that fall, and went out on contract twice more. Along the cleared fence lines, the kudzu came back every June, thinner and later each year. Burl came less that winter. He was 74. The cold got into his hip, and he sat on the tailgate while she walked the paddocks. In March, he was supposed to ride with her to the buck sale at Ball Ground. He handed her the folded paper instead, his notes on width and loin and the shape of a foot, 3 generations of judgment about goats in pencil. "You know what you're looking at," he said. "I've told you what I see. Go tell me what you see." She came back with 2 bucks. He studied them a long time and never said whether she had chosen right, which from Burl was the answer. That spring she opened the south slope, 60 more pecan trees, and set the replacements where the drought had taken the first ones. It was the last season she had. The county would come out to walk the ground and decide whether any of it had been farming. 3 seasons earlier, the only thing on that place worth counting had been the vines. That spring, she stood at the gate above the orchard and counted rows. The county truck turned in at the gate with a wiper warning, and Corinne heard it before she saw it, because the cattle guard at the road sounded like a dropped ladder. Dean Whitcomb changed into rubber boots on the tailgate and said he meant to walk the whole thing. Otis, 11 now, and taller than the top fence wire, carried the camera bag without being asked. They started at the road bank and worked east. Whitcomb had a form on a clipboard and a measuring wheel, and every so often he stopped, wrote a figure, and took a photograph. He asked for stocking rates, and she gave them by season and for the rotation, 4 acres at a time, moved on the browse line. When he asked whether any of it was written down, she came back from the truck with a binder 4 seasons thick. That was the old job, still working for her. Dates, head counts, rainfall, hay prices, a contract for every place the herd had been hired out to. He read on the tailgate a long while, then asked to see the trees. The 9 were up on the east shoulder, wide crown now that they had light, the wire baskets still on the trunks. Below them, the young rows followed the contour in strips. 340 pecan trees, not one within 6 years of setting a nut worth counting. On the north line, in 2 draws too steep to fence, what was left of the kudzu still held, and she pointed it out before he could find it. At the top of the slope, he put the clipboard down. 22 years, he said. How long did the root take? 3 seasons, she said. 4 for the rest. He wrote it down and said the letter would come from the office. It came in May and ran to 3 lines. All 104 acres were found to be in bona fide agricultural use, and the covenant remained in force. That was the end of a clock she had been listening to for 4 years. She read it twice and went out to move fence. The other envelope came at the end of that summer. The county had revalued 104 acres, cleared pasture, established orchard, working water, road frontage. Fair market value, $462,800. Nobody had offered her that. It was not a sale price, and she of all people knew what an appraisal is and is not. Under the covenant, her tax would still be figured on farm use. It was the county's opinion of what the ground had become, the same ground that had stood on those courthouse steps 3 times and drawn no bid at all. They knocked the 9 trees in the last week of October with tarps and fiberglass poles, and Burl Tannehill sat at the edge of it in a lawn chair, telling Otis he was doing it wrong. The old pecan trees had not been asked for anything in 22 years. The largest gave 231 pounds, the smallest 68. Altogether, 1,341 pounds, which at the buying station was not a living. It was a receipt with her name on it and the word pecans above the weight. She laid the assessment notice on the kitchen table that night, beside the old ledger from Atlanta, the one she had carried out of a job that priced other people's ruin. 2 ways of pricing the same ground, side by side under the same light. She looked at them a while. Then she made supper. She did not call anyone. Assessments are public, though, and Gilmer County is a small place. The scale man at the feed store had seen the poundage, and somebody's wife said something in a church basement after Wednesday's supper. By Thanksgiving, every man who had laughed on those courthouse steps had heard the number. Merle Yates heard it at the co-op, and he did not say anything at all. In December, she sat down with a pencil and worked out what it would cost to carry the whole herd through a winter on ground with nothing left to eat. The browse was gone. That had been the whole point of the goats, and it was now the trouble with them. Kept out of the orchard rows and off the young trees, the herd had 11 acres of standing pasture and a hay bill that ran past what the lease work brought in. Burl had told her 4 springs earlier that a goat is not a mower a person can park. She did not sell them off in a hurry. That was not how she did anything. She kept 26 head, the best of the does and 2 bucks, on paper as a breeding line, and in fact because Pepper's daughters were among them. She kept the lease business, which by then was the part that actually paid. The rest of the goats she sold in 1s and 2s, to people who asked questions before they asked a price. Merle Yates came in the 2nd week of December and bought 19. He stood at the fence a while before he said anything, the way he had sat at her gate that first spring with the window down. He did not apologize. Men like that do not, and she would not have known where to put it. He took his cap off, looked up at the paddock lines, and asked the question a man only asks after he has made up his mind. "If I wanted to do the back slope behind my place," he said, "where would a man start?" So she told him. 19 head was not enough for 8 acres of vine, and he should plan on borrowing more by July. Electric netting, 4 acres at a time, moved before they get bored. "And the second season is the one that will get you," she said, "because it comes back looking exactly like a year you wasted." He wrote none of it down. He asked her to say the part about the second season again. The goats went out of her trailer the way they had come out of Burl's. She thought about that on the drive back and did not mention it to anybody. Pepper was 11 by then, gray to the shoulder, slow on the hill, and still first through any gate that opened. She was not sold. On the last Sunday of the year, Corinne caught her in the lot, unbuckled the worn strap, and lifted the brass bell off her neck for the first time since Burl handed it to her that March. She carried it up to the orchard. The biggest of the 9, the one Otis had named Big Tuesday when he was 9, had a low limb that ran out over the mowed grass at about shoulder height. She hung the bell there and let go of it. The wind moved it that afternoon, and it moved on its own after that, the way anything hung in the open will. Otis was 12. He stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and listened a long while. "Now you can find the middle of it in the dark," he said. 4 springs before, the county had offered 104 acres 3 times and taken no bid, because everyone who looked saw a hillside that had quit being land and turned into weather. It was never dead ground. It was covered ground. That is a different word, and it took a woman with a ledger, 83 goats, and 4 growing seasons to say the difference out loud. The $91,400 was not the expensive part. The expensive part was standing at a fence for 4 seasons while men she had to see at the feed store every week made a joke out of her, and going out the next morning to move the netting anyway. People come up the drive now and ask what she would take for the place. She tells them it is not for sale and offers them coffee, and most stay long enough to walk the rows. The young trees are not worth anything yet. 340 of them set in strips down a slope that used to be one color, and none will carry a real crop before Otis is old enough to vote. She knew that when she planted them. The bell is still on the limb. On a still morning, it does not carry as far as the house. On a windy one, it carries all the way to the road. Send this story to someone who is holding on to a thing that everybody has told them to let go of. And down in the comments, tell us about the place where you saw nothing but weeds and the person who saw something worth keeping.